Hello, welcome to Clarity and Brevity. My name is Brandon Crow, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Bill Fullilove, who teaches Old Testament, professor there of Old Testament at Reformed Theological Seminary in New York City. And Bill has written a Hebrew textbook, and he's written some other things as well. But today I want to talk about a new project he's working on. Bill, you're working on a commentary that combines the book of Ruth and the book of Esther. Is that right?
Yes, that is right.
Now why those two books?
Well, it's actually, I have laughed about this, Brandon, because many times if you are studying or if you're getting ready to teach a Sunday school or whatever, you go by commentaries, and so often Ruth and Esther are put together. But I think the only reason they're put together is they go, oh, these are two shorter books about women, let's slap them together. And that seems a little less than sufficient as a reason. But I actually, for the series that this will become part of, which will start coming out some years from now, think it's very, very apropos, because these are not just two books about women, but they're also two books about how God is working in history. And they're both books that in the end bring us to the biblical doctrine we call providence. Now, how is it that God's working in control of all the things that happen, yet what we do still matters? How do you fit those two facts together? And Ruth and Esther are almost like two sides of that coin, but from very different perspectives about sort of the heroine of the book. So if you read the book of Ruth, you get this nice little 4-chapter book, and Ruth is like the best of the best of the best. I mean, she is just exceptionally good. She gives in chapter 1 of the book almost the perfect confession of God, that the Israelite God is her God. And the whole book is highlighting what an amazing woman Ruth is, how she's good to her mother-in-law Naomi, how she's therefore a rightful ancestress of King David. And it's a story of God taking care of a woman who's a very poor woman through all the things she tries to do. She's very active, and yet behind it, it's clearly God who's making the things she does work. Well, Esther is actually the story of God working to protect his people through somebody who actually, if you get outside the Sunday school version of it, you realize is made some really morally questionable choices. So Esther ends up being the heroine, but unlike Ruth, who is sort of great from the start, Esther, you kind of go, if you really read it carefully, you say, I'm not sure that she's being terribly faithful to God for much of the book. Her mentor, the guy named Mordecai, who's her uncle, it's not clear that he's being super faithful to God, yet God's also taking care of these two people. And so when you put Ruth and Esther together, you get two really incredible biblical books that are just written with this wonderful artistry. Yet they're both making the same point. Ruth says God's taking care of the people who are following him deeply and carefully. Esther says, hey, even when you've screwed up a bunch and you've made a bunch of mistakes and you're not following God very well, guess what? He's still taking care of you too. And of course, if God's taking care of all the people who are messed up and all the people who are doing well, it means that God's taking care of all of us. So as we look at how God controls this world we live in, how he controls history, but how our activities still make a difference, I love doing these two books together because they're about the same thing, but they're about the same thing from two very different types of people.
And they're about two different eras as well, aren't they, from Israel's history?
Yes, so Ruth is set early in Israel's history, again, before King David is born. So it's set in the time of the judges. The beginning of the book of Ruth is when the judges were judging. So it's in a pre-monarchy time. Esther, between then, you get Solomon and David, you get the Israelite kings, you get a division of the kingdom, you get a destruction of the northern part of that divided kingdom, then a destruction of the southern part of that divided kingdom. Esther is set all the way over in Persia, where the Persian Empire has taken over the remains of a Babylonian empire that had destroyed the nation of Judah. And so, yes, also two women, one early in history, one late in Israel's history. But again, the same God is taking care of both of them.
Yeah. So as you think about the relationship of of these women to the issue of providence. Another question that might come up is, how do we see this pointing forward to the New Testament reality that points us to Christ? Can you give us a little bit of an insight there into how Ruth points us ahead to Christ and how Esther points us ahead to Christ as well?
Sure. The only challenge is to only give you one. Ruth is one of these books that you can see Jesus in this book in about 85 different ways. And the challenge when you're teaching the book is, which one do I pick and major on? But Ruth is a story fundamentally of what the Bible calls redemption. She is in a perilous situation economically. She is a refugee. And the fundamental problem is that the land that would have sustained her family has been sold, and so it needs to be bought back, redeemed. But not just the land needs to be redeemed. Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi, they need to be redeemed. They need to be purchased back from effectively almost a slavery they can't get out of. And of course, what we as followers of Jesus need, what all people need, is to be redeemed. And so Ruth points forward to Jesus in redemption actually having happened. Esther, I would say there are a number of ways, again, it can point forward to Jesus, but maybe this would be the most conspicuous one, is God's name never gets mentioned in the book of Esther. There's no place, but his fingerprints are all over it. It is wild beyond improbable to impossible for there to possibly be the deliverance God gives in Esther, and yet he gives it. And then we think, Esther is a story where everything seems to have turned against them. And yet, though everything's turned against him, God still is working for good in it. Well, that's the New Testament story. On the cross, the darkest day of human history, it looks like the devil has won. Everything has turned against. But it's actually the moment of our greatest deliverance. Well, that's the same story Esther tells. Everything's against them. It looks like evil has won. Disaster has come, and yet at the last moment, God has saved everything. Well, that's the story of the gospel.
Well said. Thank you, Bill, for those brief insights into Ruth and Esther. And thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Remember to keep it clear and focus on Christ.